VGA. Yeah, I'm Rob England. A lot of you won't know me because I live in a different world to you guys. There's no Apple. Oh, VGA. So, we can use a PowerPoint, it's really outrageous. Yeah, so I live in a different world. I work in the service management space in IT, and I'm a commentator. I have a blog that has a bit of a following in that world, and I talk a lot about culture and practices in the culture and practices in the IT world. But I kind of represent the trad service management camp, if you like. And so John and I have talked online for a number of years, back to the time when John was working in the Tivoli space. And then I sort of watched the evolution of this whole DevOps movement, and I guess along the way we might have diverged in our views a little between the two of us and had some interesting debates online. But I kind of come full circle on that and finally seen the light, much to John's relief, I'm sure, and that's what today's presentation is basically talking about. See, I said some very rude things, and I'm not going to repeat them today, but that comes from what's the bid here? Unless it's decided it doesn't want to. Hey, I'll just talk to it. There's a couple of pictures. So I can see if we can get it back. Let's just refuse to talk to a non-Apple device. Yeah, so things got a bit heated on the blog because it is a very conservative blog. It's called the IT Skeptic. Hey, you know, that's the whole premise of the blog, is to take a skeptical view on things and to particularly hose down irrational exuberance everywhere that it occurs in IT, because we are a very fad-driven industry. So there are times when a cool head is required. And in fact, ironically, the blog started out by challenging some of the irrational exuberance around ITIL. When ITIL was the flavour du jour and the cure to everything, the magic pixie dust was going to solve all our problems. So I started out as trying to deal with the ITIL thing, and moved on from there to other things that have come along. So when DevOps came along, my first posture was, of course, to look at it very critically and to try and remove any of the excessive exuberance around that movement. So it's fair to say that I was taking a fairly entrenched position on the blog initially. And I love the way John talks about culture, because this is all very cultural. There are two camps, out there at the moment. There's the DevOps camp and community and movement, and it is very counterintuitive to what you might think of as the traditional and conservative sectors of IT. Probably represented most strongly by service management in general and ITIL in particular. And that's an oversimplification of the situation. There are plenty of people like in Stratus who culturally come from both camps and understand both camps and live in both and can bridge the two. But as a simplification, there is this us and them forming, and certainly I was an extreme example of that sitting there in the blog firing all these shells of DevOps. And if you want to amuse yourself, you can go dig in and see some of the things I said over the last couple of years. And it's very challenging what DevOps is presenting. So it's a cultural issue. And that's what interests me. Okay, so I'm a culture and people and practices guy, and I'm not a technology person at all. You know, running my little old HP netbook here. So, you know, I tweeted the other day to Patrick that sometimes when you DevOps guys say something, it's like I've intercepted a SETI transmission from outer space. It's like, what are these people saying? I don't even understand the words. Right? It's completely alien because it is a very technology and automation driven movement, even though, as John says, there's this really essential fundamental cultural thing about trying to change the way people think and act and work. It's very technology centric, so I find that really quite alien as well. So you can't get away from the fact that DevOps creates this challenge for the IT community, and you can't get away from the fact that there is this fracture forming between the sort of the two camps. But I've kind of come around in my thinking, and that's what I want to talk about today. So first of all, quickly, some terminology. Service management, which has probably been, how many people have been ITIL shifted at some point in their career? Has anyone in the room had the Kool-Aid? Yeah, there's a few. Service management, you know, there are perceptions around service management that it's a theory, it's a model for how you work, it's an approach, which is not true at all. You know, we've gone from the agricultural to the industrial to the service-based economy. In a service-based economy, service management describes reality. Okay, service management describes how the world works, period. Not a way to describe it, it is the description of how the world works in service management. There are specific instances of that. So like in IT service management, we're talking about how IT works, because IT is a service. So therefore IT service management talks about how it works. Not a possible way for it to work, but how it works. Now you're all sitting there thinking, bullshit. Right? It's this thing way over there. But ITIL is one description of service management. Okay? ITIL is one particular embodiment of some ideas about service management. So ITIL is very specific and quite conservative in training. But that doesn't mean that service management is. It's just that ITIL is one way of describing service management. Okay? So please don't think of service management as a theory. Service management is how the world works. ITIL is a theory for how you do service management. And then we've got DevOps. So to me, as a service management guy, DevOps is another way of describing service management. ITIL and DevOps are two different views of the world. Service management is the world when you're in a service industry, and IT is a service industry. So that's a slightly different way of thinking, and I hope for you, and it's leading us towards some commonality between the two. But right at the moment, the views are kind of divided. So let me talk about some sort of stereotypical characterizations here. And so here's one for the ITSM ITIL world. That's probably a comfortable characterization to a lot of people in this room. Okay? As being conservative, old school, formal, very authoritarian and structured and strict and limiting. Definitely, as John was saying, seen as being slow and cumbersome in response, particularly to development world. And you know, so it's this stupid, unthinking, by the book approach to doing things. It's old, it's dated, it's past it. It prevents value from being delivered. Whereas, you know, DevOps can be characterised as being the liberal, modern, informal approach to doing things. It's empowering people, it's liberating, it's a laissez-faire approach. It's really fast and nimble, smart, considered, it's new and fresh, it enables value to be produced in the environment. These are two sort of stereotypical characterisations. I could also add, this is very static. The ITIL world of DevOps is very dynamic. But that's the view looking this way. If you look this way and say, what are the characterisations? You might get a different view of the world. You might get people who see ITSM and ITIL as being the wise, experienced, battle-scarred, road warrior mindset. It's the generally accepted and sensible way that we do things. It's like generally accepted accounting principles only for IT, right? It's very adaptable. One of the basic premises has always been adopt and adapt to the environment you're in. It's the sensible approach. It's business-like, conservative, but sensible. And it's the accumulated learning of the last 40 years of information technology. So therefore, one of its primary functions is to protect value. Protect the existing value in the organisation. I'm going to talk about that a bit more. And the characterisation of DevOps might be that it's the foolish, rash, naive, brash, wild, rebellious, anti-authoritarian thing that's bursting up in our midst. It's uncontrolled, it's chaotic. This whole 10 releases a day, that keeps people awake at nights in some communities, right? So it's really fixated. It's unthinking. It's just, because it's fixated on these new principles. It's driven. It has a cultish fervour about it, which is quite unsettling. And obviously it's really trendy and faddish and new. And so therefore, it threatens value in the organisation. So this is a different stereotypical characterisation. And depending on which, it's a spectrum. I mean, people aren't that polarised, but, people are somewhere along those spectrums of characterisations. And I'm betting some of these characterisations you're comfortable with. Right? Everyone in this room is going, oh yeah, it's some of that. So it happens. And there is a disconnect between the two communities, the two cultures, the two mindsets, the two approaches to how we do IT. And we've got to do something about that. Just before I talk about that, one little observation for you from a battle-scarred road warrior of some of these movements. Who's heard of Gartner life cycle? A lot of people in the room? So it's the life cycle that a movement or an idea or a technology goes through in terms of the expectations of the community for that thing. And so every new thing gets these hyper-inflated expectations as it first appears in the community, and everyone is out there overselling it as the solution to all our woes and the magic pixie dust, right? And the expectations for it get hyped and inflated beyond what's reasonable. Usually driven by technology vendors and the analysts who feed upon them, right? So they whip up this frenzy. And then as people start using it and reality sets in, because we're humans, there's this emotional pendulum and we plunge into what's called the trough of despondency. As everyone decides that this thing's rubbish and it's hopeless and there's this emotional backlash, and then eventually, hopefully, the system stabilises. Of course, if you've got any systems theory background, you know that it can be a lot more complex than that, but this is the Gartner model. And ITIL is about here at the moment. It's right down, it's been in the trough of despondency for a number of years now. There's been this huge backlash against ITIL. So that the IT skeptic, I find myself in the peculiar position on the blog these days of defending ITIL. Because all the irrational exuberance is actually over in the anti-ITIL camp, who say really irrational, silly, absurd things trying to attack ITIL. So I've gone full cycle myself. I've followed this curve, except I'm countercyclic, being the skeptic, of throwing rocks and cold water at ITIL in the early days, and now I'm actually at times defending it from unreasonable attacks at ITIL. So what I'd say to you, to the DevOps crowd, is that I think DevOps is about here. I think there's all this positive energy to the point of irrational exuberance at times around DevOps. And I think what you're going to see over the next not too many years is this big crash, this emotional crash when the honeymoon's over. And you know, I'll predict for you that DevOps is going to be sitting there defending itself against irrational attacks, of which I was probably an early example. So, there's a slogan that's used a lot, a motto that's used a lot by some of the American police forces, which is to protect and serve. And I really like that as a description, a model of what IT exists for. Why we have an information technology function within organisations. We're there to protect the existing investment in the organisation. And we're there to serve the needs of the business. And the needs of the business are generally for new stuff. We want to go here, we want to do that, we want to launch this, we want to expand that, right? But what we lose sight of a lot, I think, in IT, is that we exist to protect and serve. That we've got this dual role, and that is a dichotomy. There is a conflict between those two. So, as an example, think of finance rather than IT. So somebody says, we want to launch a whole new marketing campaign to do blah, 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 and they go to the CFO and they say, we want, you know, $1.6 million to do this, and the CFO opens the drawer and says, sorry, the drawer's empty, we can't afford it. There's no money for that. What the CFO is doing is protecting the financial viability of the organisation. It's certainly not serving the needs of the market. But there are times when a CFO will do that. There are times when a CFO will say, I recommend against this course of action because it is financially irresponsible for our company to be making that sort of investment at the moment. Or if we're going to do that, then tell me what else we're going to shut down and find the funds to fund this. So part of the CFO's role is to protect the organisation from a financial point of view. In exactly the same way, IT exists to protect and serve. So when we talk about protect, there's one word, legacy. Legacy systems. So legacy systems from a business point of view represent an investment in the data that's in there, the existing corporate data, and the systems to interact with that data, that technology, software and hardware, and blah, blah, blah. And the capabilities that we wrap around that to make it function, the infrastructure and the operations, right? That's from a business point of view, that's an investment. Money sunk in building something. No different to building a factory, a production line, you know, a building. It's an investment. And so what does business measure around an investment? They measure ROI. They want a return on their investment. And so from a business point of view, from the people who own the company, they've got $1 billion invested in 20 years of building those information technology systems in an existing company. If there's a legacy environment there, as John said, it's infinitely more complex, and it's a sunk investment by that organisation. It's not something that they're just going to tear down tomorrow. Just like the factory's not something that they're going to put a dozer through tomorrow. They will not demolish the factory until it no longer meets the needs of the organisation and until they've squeezed their investment. Until it's starting to fall down, until it's starting to need more investment in it to renovate it than it would be to just dozer it and build it and rebuild it. But there'll be a lag where that factory or that IT system needs to keep functioning for years in order to recover the investment in it. And when we change it, we still need to protect the investment in the data. That's a huge corporate asset. So, you know, I can change my phone. I just changed it a month ago, right? And I got a free one from Voda, bless them. So I didn't have to worry about finding the capital to do that, you know. And even if I had to pay for it, then I'm not answerable to anyone for that investment. And when I changed the phone, I think I probably lost some data. I didn't really care. I gave my old phone to my son, and he said, "Shall I re-image it?" And I said, "Yeah, go on. I think I've got everything off it. I'm mostly in the cloud, you know, Google Contacts and so on." And then I figured out later on a couple of things that I had lost. But your personal technology experience in your personal area network, whatever you want to call it, is in no way, bears no resemblance to how a business manages its IT investments. It bears no resemblance, but it bears as much resemblance as managing your front lawn bears to the North American grain growing industry. It bears as much resemblance as your fly mow does to a combine harvester, right? They're just not the same thing. So you can't refresh an existing IT infrastructure in the same way that you can just refresh your mobile phone. It's this huge sunk investment. So we exist to protect and serve. It's different if you're a startup. It's different if you're doing what I call putting lipstick on the pig, right? If you're wrapping cool web apps around a core legacy system. If you're building new standalone stuff, then it's different. But in an environment that has legacy, then we exist to protect and serve. And so if you look on some sort of spectrum of protect and serve, because as I say, these are conflicting things. Every time we want to change stuff and build stuff and spend money and invest, we must not at the same time endanger our existing systems we're trying to protect. It's fair to say that ITSM in general, and ITIL in particular, is probably quite heavily skewed over towards the protect side of the system. It emphasises protecting existing systems. It emphasises managing risk. It emphasises governance. Whereas it's also fair to say that DevOps is probably way around the other end of the spectrum. DevOps is focused on delivery of value, on serving the business, on maximising responsiveness to the requirements of the organisation. To the extent that it causes some of us a little bit of concern over on this side of the equation. But there's a different spectrum. Well, no. We sort of conventional ITSMers are guilty of seeing it slightly different. We're seeing it as not so much protect and serve, but robust and fragile. We're seeing it as this DevOps stuff looks really dangerous. We're there to protect, and all they want to do is, you know, remove our controls, break things down, change things 3 times a day. You know, this is seen as, in the traditional trad ITSM mindset, as this sort of conflict between robust and fragile. So and this was where I was always coming from in challenging DevOps, throwing rocks at DevOps. It was always around this sort of mindset that it's a robust, fragile equation where DevOps looks really, really dangerous. And my epiphany came with just a almost throwaway post by G.S. Humboldt talking about anti-fragile. Anyone heard of anti-fragile? A few of the DevOps DevOps community certainly will it, right? So it's Nicholas Tallard's, a good friend of John's, by the way, Nick Tallard's book on anti-fragility, where he says that it's not a matter of, you know, fragile versus robust, that that robust is actually seen in a negative light in Nick's book, and as being all these things we're talking about with ITSM, too controlling, stabilising, trying to lock everything down, make it safe, and that what we want to aspire to is actually anti-fragility, which is all the things that DevOps talks about. Deliberately breaking it, stressing the system, driving the system hard, high degrees of change, you know, the ability to respond quickly through the high change rate and so on. And so as I was understanding this concept of anti-fragile for the first time, then I got this understanding that it's not just this robust versus fragile simple dichotomy, and that I'm seeing the world way too simply, and that DevOps has this place in our thinking with this concept of anti-fragile as a positive thing. So, DevOps, you know, to me, quite clearly is sitting here, and ITIL is sitting over here. We are both camps. What I really understood was that both camps are trying to do the same thing. Both camps are trying to move us up that chart. Both camps are trying to get away from fragile. Both camps are trying to make the system not fragile, but we're doing it in different ways. ITIL's moving up towards this robust mindset, and DevOps is moving up towards this anti-fragile mindset. But we're both trying to do the same thing, which is move up the chart. And that if we look at that protect and serve spectrum I talked about before, it's not the same thing as robust versus anti-fragile. They're maybe not completely orthogonal to each other, but they're different things. They're a different dimension. And so without having to give up my position that we exist both to protect and serve, I can say that the thing that DevOps is trying to teach the ITIL world, the thing that the ITIL world needs to understand, is the need to move right on that thing, to move away from this robust fixation towards understanding the positive benefits of an anti-fragile world. And we can go and say to these really conservative ITIListas, we're not moving back to fragile. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to this more responsive and dynamic anti-fragile model. And that's a story that I know I didn't understand. And that's a story that I think a lot of ITSM people don't understand. And I think that's a compelling story that works. To pry people, to move people away from their entrenched, conservative, ITIL style service management position to this more dynamic one represented by DevOps. Does that model work for you? To me, that's a really powerful way of communicating to the non-DevOps camp, you know, in a way that is non-threatening. So I got quite excited when the light finally went on, despite John hitting around the head for years without it quite going on. I got quite excited to say, hey, wait a minute, so now I can see that if you extrapolate forward into the future where service management is thinking and going, if you extrapolate forward into where DevOps is going, there's the possibility that there's a common model. There's the possibility that we can come up with a common way of speaking and thinking, a common culture that is acceptable to both. We don't have to have this, these two camps at war and entrenched, digging into the trenches and bringing in the heavy guns at each other. That we can have a reconciliation of the two mindsets. We can bring the two cultures together to some sort of common view of the world in the future. And I think, you know, one of the big things that DevOps brings to that is the anti-fragility. That's probably the thing that it brings to that model. And I think that service management, TradOps service management, as represented by ITIL, also has something to bring to the table. And, you know, a lot of people believe that, but not everyone. And so, you know, there's some value there in those 30 years of ideas that also come to that kind of model. So, I've got this thing on my blog that I call kamu, which is a Maori word. I love appropriating Maori words for stuff that I do in IT because they come without baggage, a whole lot of meaning that they've been used for something foreign. So, kamu is a word that means to join together in singing the chorus of the song. So each group's had their verse that they sang, and then you come together to sing the chorus. So it's perfect as the word for having a movement's too grand a word, but an initiative to try and get people singing the same song, to try and find some sort of commonality between the conservative world and the DevOps world. And so there's a Google Plus discussion group. The URL's on the bottom there. We'll give it to you afterwards if anyone wants to come and discuss some of this stuff. And there's a page on my blog where I'm tracking the ideas, sort of building the ideas as they go. So come and visit itskeptic.org. So I'm still on the front page of the blog. It's this idea of trying to find a unified theory or model or worldview between the two. What does it look like? You know, what does it look like if we try and find something that is common between the DevOps worldview and the traditional IT setting? Well, the answer is I don't know. And I don't have time. But I think primarily it's about common IT operating model across both development and production, and dealing with all the aspects that we need to deal with in that. And I think, and we can talk about this, anyone wants to engage with me offline, I think to me the biggest challenge I see is that as we move towards the cloudified world, and George was saying to me just before, you know, that he sees in Stratus as basically trying to reconcile cloud and ITIL in a common view. You know, as we move towards this more cloudified world, then the value networks, I think, get really challenging in terms of multi-party delivery of service. And you know, DevOps is great when you've got it inside a single organisation, but I'm sure, you know, you guys will agree and tell me a lot more about what does it start to look like when this is your service chain? What does it start to look like when there are at least 3 independent parties delivering a service and the actual code's being written back here at the top of that stack? So I think there's a lot of stuff in service management that helps us deal with that and understand that. And I think there's a whole lot in DevOps that helps us automate that, build that, and make it work. Exactly what it looks like, as I say, I haven't got a clue, but rather than sitting there throwing rocks for the rest of my life, I've decided that it's more productive if we all try and get along and get a common view of the world. So that's what this thing kamu is about. Oh, incidentally, the symbol, the Maori punamu, is a symbol of uniting 2 entities together. So if it's a single twist, it's all about love and or friendship, you know, to individuals. But if it's a multi-twist like that, it's talking about community, it's about uniting 2 communities. So that seems like a really good symbol as well. To talk about this idea that you can't sort of keep doing DevOps as a cult and driving it you know, in isolation forward with all this energy, because it's just going to further alienate that traditional camp, who are only going to dig their heels in deeper and become more entrenched. And they can't keep sitting there digging their heels in and getting more entrenched because of the obvious value that DevOps is delivering, the obvious transformational potential of it. So somewhere along the line, you know, we've got to be positive and try and work together to come up with something. So I'm taking that step of offering the olive branch and trying to make peace for past sins and find a way going forward to get a common worldview. And hopefully a few of you in the room might be inspired, and a few of you online might be inspired to contribute to that and help with some ideas. Thanks very much. And for John, really,
that was brilliant. It's a good. I really want to open that up in relevant spaces because I think for some of us, one of the things not to give another presentation, so I'm going to bring other people up. One of the things I found early on in the DevOps movement is the excitement and all that passion turned into this kind of. We almost became numb to the message we were sending to people, which is first very tool centric, like you said, the language. I don't like those guys. They say words I don't understand, make me feel stupid. And then the like, hey, you should be doing, us saying, we're doing 100 deploys a day, like, comes out to other people who aren't doing that as you're idiots for not, right? And so what I think is awesome is opening up a discussion, try to figure out how different worlds understand what you're saying without, offending and coming to a consensus.